Anyone who is hoping that we're going to get some big apology from him is destined to be disappointed. But I think that the reality is this has happened because not only was there a bit of a market dip on Thursday and Friday last week in response to the tariff announcements on the second, that was not correcting itself. There was not, there wasn't even what we would call in the US a dead cat bounce in the market. There was only the dead cat.
Well, the Asian markets have bounced back this morning, relieved about Donald Trump's 90-day pause on those increased tariffs on most countries. Most analysts think that bond markets, as Stig was saying there, forced him into the delay. But Trump supporters say that's misunderstanding how the president was using his leverage to force countries to agree concessions on trade. The one country Donald Trump is still engaged in a trade war with is China. Tariffs on Chinese goods now stand at 125%. President Trump said China would also have to come to the table.
Can you walk us through your thinking about why you decided to put a 90-day pause?
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid. Somebody had to do what we did, and I did a 90-day pause for the people that didn't retaliate, because I told them if you retaliate, we're going to double it. And that's what I did with China, because they did retaliate. A deal's going to be made with China. A deal's going to be made with every one of them. And there'll be fair deals. I just want fair. There will be fair deals for everybody. But they weren't fair to the United States. They were sucking us dry, and you can't do that. Bond market is very tricky. I was watching it, but if you look at it now, it's beautiful. The bond market right now is beautiful. But yeah, I saw last night where people were getting a little queasy. I think everything had, well, the big move wasn't what I did today. The big move was what I did on Liberation Day.
Well, Joe Sternberg is a member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board and the political economics columnist. He joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
What do you make of this? Is this a result of seeing the bond markets, or is this a result of political pressure on the president?
Oh, I think it can be both. I think that sort of the immediate thing that was starting to happen yesterday is that what had been going on in stock markets for some days now was starting to filter into bond markets and also currency markets. The other thing that was going on yesterday is that the value of the dollar was continuing to slip, and I think that is the point at which even someone who is determined to claim that maybe stocks had been a little overpriced before, maybe that there's this difference between the Wall Street economy and the Main Street economy, as we would put it in the U.S., and that maybe what's happening in the stock exchange doesn't matter so much to ordinary people. I mean, once it's gone into the bond market, that has a very direct effect on people's borrowing costs, and politicians rightly start to worry. And so my hunch, based on what we're seeing so far about how this decision got made, is that it was a combination of that pressure plus, indications that maybe behind the scenes, Republican members of Congress in particular were starting to get very nervous about this tariff policy because they were hearing from their constituents back home that maybe this wasn't going to be the unambiguously good thing for the American economy that Trump and his advisors had said that the tariffs would be.
Well, let's have a quick listen, shall we? Because this is Donald Trump talking last night when he was asked about his motivation for this 90-day pause, and specifically about the bond markets.
The bond market right now is beautiful. But yeah, I saw last night where people were getting a little queasy.
A little queasy, Joe. I mean, is that a bit of an understatement here? Because there were those around Donald Trump, like Elon Musk, they were starting to be very public in their criticism of him.
Yeah, and I think you're never going to expect Trump to honestly admit what motivated him to do something, particularly when the motivation was this spectacular proof that his policy was a terrible mistake. So, I think anyone who is hoping that we're going to get some big apology from him is destined to be disappointed. But I think that the reality is that this has happened because not only was there a bit of a market dip on Thursday and Friday last week in response to the tariff announcements on the second, that was not correcting itself. There was not, there wasn't even what we would call in the US a dead cat bounce in the market. There was only the dead cat. And then it starts spreading into the bond markets, and he had to reverse course.
Well, let's work out what happens next. Donald Trump is promising a 90-day pause. Important to say, though, it's still 10% tariffs on all nations around the world, apart from China, where it's 125%. How likely is it now that trade deals will be rushed through with all those other countries and those tariffs removed altogether? What do you think?
Well, I think that the problem is that he still has in his circle people who think that some baseline level of tariff that is much higher than the U.S. had before is desirable and would be good for the economy. And so I think that is what makes me suspect and worry that the 10% baseline for everyone is going to be with us for much longer than we would want it to be. And the other thing that I think that we need to be cautious about here is, I mean, that 125% tariff on China is enormous, especially given the volume of goods that America imports from China. So I'm not at all convinced that we are out of the economic woods at this point, because those higher prices on Chinese imports are going to, caused by this enormous tariff, are going to continue to ricochet through the U.S. economy. Households are going to feel that in particular in the form of either higher prices or just not being able to, get those Chinese goods anymore because the imports won't be coming in the first place. And this also creates an enormous number of problems along supply chains for American manufacturers who are dependent on components from China. So I think that, maybe it's more accurate to say that we have moved into a new destructive phase of the trade war, from the previous destructive phase of the trade war, but we're not out of the trade war at all.
So a small slither of optimism potentially, but we're not quite there yet. Just finally, Joe, what are you hearing from where you are about the likely response from China, the next steps here?
Well, I think that it is difficult for China to back down here, and they may think that they have a certain amount of leverage precisely because the trading relationship is so big at the moment. And I mean, some form of decoupling between the U.S. and China has been on the agenda for a long time, and I think that there are a lot of policymakers in Washington who have a pretty hawkish view of China and were concerned about the extent of those linkages. And there's a good argument that the U.S. needs to be careful about its national security interests there. This kind of immediate decoupling with 125% tariff, I don't think even the most hawkish person in Washington would ever have suggested that we attempt something like this. And so I think that, the problem with trying to use a tariff of that magnitude as negotiating leverage is you're saying, well, I'm prepared to shoot myself in the foot if you don't give me what I want. And so, does Xi Jinping have an incentive to come to the table? Yes, because this isn't good for China's economy, but he will also understand that this is terrible for the U.S. economy.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Joe, many thanks for your time on the programme this morning. That is Joe Sternberg there from the Wall Street Journal.